Hi, it's Paul Banis of GreatDad.com, and thank you very much for joining either the podcast or the YouTube version of the podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you took just a second to subscribe either on your podcast app or in YouTube. It doesn't really do anything. It's not going to send you any emails. It's just going to show up more often on your feed, and it does me a lot of good in terms of getting more exposure for this work I do to support dads. I'd also like to invite you to come to my page, GreatDad.com/go, if you'd like to discuss more about any of the issues that we are covering within the podcast, especially if there's any way I can help you to be a sounding board in your own struggles to be a dad and to be there for your family. So take a look at that. It also includes a link to my course on gratitude, where at GreatDad.com/gratitude with a offer to take that course for free. So see you in a second. Hey, it's Paul Vance at GreatDad.com here with my weekly series talking to dads about modern fatherhood. And I've got a fellow coach on with me today. Welcome, Scott Anderson.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here.
So I'm really intrigued to talk to you because I think like a lot of men post, maybe 40, I've experienced burnout in my life, and you're really an expert on that area. Not only are you a coach, you've got the same kind of certification I did through coactive training, but you're also a therapist, and you've had a lot of life experience launching companies and working through your own burnout. So I'm intrigued to talk to you about your experience with your clients and your own personal experience. Well, let's start maybe with some of the thing what burnout is versus being tired or
Sure.
bored or not as excited about your job or whatever. I think there is a difference there, right?
Oh, there sure is. There is a clinical definition by the World Health Organization for what workplace burnout is. And interestingly, in fact, I'll give you a link in for the show notes. So folks, if they want to, can take an online assessment and really understand whether their symptoms fit the WHO criteria. Um, One of the things that people think of is exhaustion, and that's usually the canary in the coal mine. But it's the kind of exhaustion where you get a good night's sleep and you wake up exhausted, or you take a vacation. We've got clients who have taken, a month's vacation or a 6 month sabbatical and are still exhausted. But that's the canary in the coal mine. That's the part that's noticeable. The part that isn't noticeable for most people is a very gradual, and this is hard for high performing, achieving people to hear, but there's a tendency towards victimhood, among other things.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a cynicism that creeps into our lives and into our thinking, and a lot of people feel very isolated and alone, but they're also isolating themselves, especially from whether it's customers, investors, business partners, work colleagues, et cetera. But there's also, and you'll see this in the assessment if you take it, one of the top characteristics. It was actually Christina Maslach at UCal Berkeley who identified. She created the Maslach Burnout Inventory, and there are 200 questions, and a big chunk of those questions has to do with attributing your own frustration to other people.
That's interesting.
And it creeps in very subtly. But there's this feeling that no one understands, no one can understand what I'm going through. And so there are a number of other characteristics. There's a sort of a feeling of despair. And as I think Thoreau said, men lead lives of quiet desperation. And as we talked about earlier, especially when you hit 40, there is this quiet desperation, not just men, obviously women too, but that definitely occurs.
So is that the classic time that the people talk about the the 40 the 40s being that midlife crisis time? Is that the bulk of people experiencing
I
burnout, or
would I would say that a lot
25 or
of
30 like working their tail off 80 hours a week experience burnout in the same way as a 40-year-old?
Yeah, well, actually, they do. I mean, we've got clients that are your age and mine, let's say, but we've also got clients in their 20s. We've recently been working for an engineer, and engineering is a very tough field, and there aren't enough engineers and so forth, who is late 20s. And so it's possible for it to occur really at any age. We find that it's less about the age and more about sort of the demographics of, do you have a partner, a significant other, a spouse? Do you have children present? I mean, these things tend to compound it. Also, for most people that we work with, and a lot of the people statistically who get burnout are people who are very successful and are, by definition, super high achievers, set super high goals. Our experience is they tend to be perfectionists, and they also tend to have poor boundaries. They tend to say yes, especially early in their careers. They tend to say yes when they might have said no, compensating for early in their careers for lack of experience, lack of knowledge, and they move up the ladder faster. So by the time they're late 30s or early 40s, they've got a lot of responsibility at work and often the responsibility at home that you mentioned.
Do you think it has any relationship to the freedom to have that kind of reaction to the existential meaning? The existential problem of life is, if you have the means and you have your basic Maslow hierarchy of needs kind of needs met, and you have time to ponder, like, what the hell am I doing this for? And the weight of thinking like you're going to work another 25, 30 years doing the same thing is more on top of you versus somebody who's like, let's say, a line worker at a auto plant, who's kind of been going through the motions for a long time, and just realize that that's part of life.
Well, my experience is actually we work with all walks of life,
Yeah.
and people that are tradesmen and I don't know, factory workers, blue collar, let's say, workers, as well as people who own and run big companies, and in my case, like serial entrepreneurs. And what we found is that it has more to do with the two most common traits are a super high standards for yourself and boundaries that are, let's say, porous at best. That combination is kind of lethal. And this is why we say it's not very popular, but we found it to be true in our practice, is that with rare exceptions, and again, it's a controversial thing to say, but we've really found this, is that people cause their own burnout. And there's maybe 10% of folks who work in a toxic environment or a truly discriminatory or racist or misogynist or otherwise toxic work environment. And if that's true, you should run away screaming. That's our that's our advice. But the experience of almost say 95% of our clients is that when you get right down to it, it's expecting the impossible from themselves. And expecting, for example, that there is work-life balance. I wish the term had never been created because it sets us up for.
It gives people the illusion.
Yeah, it's just not real.
So is part of it? I mean, maybe I'm making this very personal, but is part of it, though, feeling like you're in that trap of, you have the house, you have the two cars, you have the kids in the private school, and all those other things, and now how do you possibly get out? And that compounds that feeling. I mean, maybe that's back to your point about not having put up boundaries or created a life that you can manage, and now life seems to be managing you.
Yeah, well, I think that, again, a lot of people, and again, whether you're a blue collar worker or own your own business or anywhere in between, it has a lot to do with having extremely high standards and high goals. And, and then we end up being surprised. And we also don't say no very well, neither at home nor at work. And then we're surprised that we're in kind of a vice. One of my clients said to me recently, it feels as though the choice is succeed at home or succeed at work. Pick one, that it's a zero-sum game. And, but, it's not like anybody did this to us. It's not like the world conspired, to make us suffer. We have unrealistic expectations, many of us. And also, to be honest, my experience has been that it's kind of an addiction. This achievement mentality is kind of, and pleasing everyone is kind of an addiction. And the good news is, however, and I discovered the method that we use is in part because of a lot of research the research that we did with PTSD treatment technology, but also using sources like Dr. Maslach at Berkeley. But a lot of it is for me to recover from my own burnout. I really had to stumble along and try to find things. And even though I went to graduate school and am a practicing therapist, there's very little written. There's very little literature about how to recover. So,
That's
we really
surprising.
had to eat our own cooking and kind of stumble along and find things. And the good news is that there are some very practical, very fast acting, and very uh, easy to execute techniques that really, really work and can work really quickly. The
Well,
problem,
I'd love to
go
talk
ahead.
about some of those. Before we get to that, what are some of
Yeah.
the other symptoms of burnout versus some of the other things? You mentioned like real fatigue. I would
Yeah.
imagine alcohol, drug abuse, that's part of it.
Well, often, yeah, often people try to medicate the exhaustion and also the depression or the anxiety
Right.
in lots of other ways. So, a lot of our clients, without being aware of it, in a lot of cases, act out in a variety of ways, and whether that it can take a million forms.
Mhm.
Drugs and alcohol is sort of the obvious, but sometimes it's spending, sometimes
Mm.
it's eating, sometimes it's exercise.
Mhm.
And so it can take a myriad of forms, um, and uh, and that's also one of those canaries in the coal mine. I mean, it shows up when you get your Amazon bill, or it shows up in gambling. We have clients that have gambling problems. It obviously shows up with alcohol or drug use, and often what we find is that if our clients have a significant other, the some of the most immediate feedback comes there.
Mm.
The kind of archetypal conversation that our clients hear is somebody in the family saying to you, "You're present, but you're not here. You're looking, even if you're not looking at your phone, your mind is somewhere else. Your mind
Mm.
is at work. You're it's beyond distracted. You're simply not here." And that's when we get into that horrible zero sum game question of succeed at home or succeed at work. So those are kind of the atmosphere. By the time people contact us, it's usually because they're getting some pressure at work or at home or both. A lot of
Yeah.
times their business partners or employers or clients are saying, what's going on with you?
That's, I mean, I work with dads principally who are trying to strike that. It may not always come up like trying to create that work life balance, but it comes from either trying to get ahead of that kind of problem before it starts, or usually, sadly, people wait until there's a crisis at home to get
Exactly.
some sort of help, or at least get somebody to even listen to them talk about what's going on, because they don't they haven't realized how dangerous this can be. I mean, like you say, it's really
Yeah.
quite often it's either you fail at work, something happens at work because you're so drawn by family, or the family is falling apart, and then the work is getting the vast part of your attention, and it's a tragedy. And we're lucky that the generation coming up today, young dads today, there are more resources to get ahead of this. And I always advise people to try to get as much advice. I know you do a 15-minute discovery call, or a burnout quick
Yes.
burnout
Yes.
tips call that you offer to people. And I always tell people to take advantage of that, because we all
Yeah,
need
it's called,
what you can.
if any of your listeners are interested, we have a free 15-minute coaching call where typically we ask people to take the online assessment to just understand whether burnout may be the issue. But based on that assessment, then we typically will suggest a couple of really quick, easy interventions that you could start using today. And it isn't all the way, it isn't the entire path to
No.
recovery, but it's the start. It's called fastfixcall.com. And yeah, we'd love it if anybody who's listening wants to check it out, because it's a great way to get started and to
Yeah.
realize that there is hope. That's the headline, I think, is that you really don't have to suffer like this. And if you want to prevent it, it's also preventable. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so let's get into some of whatever hints you can give us to what are the
Sure.
big macro answers or potential solutions for this, if you're
Sure.
you're going through it.
Absolutely. Well, the biggest cause of burnout is uninterrupted stress. I mean, if you look at Dr. Maslach's research or the WHO research, it boils down to uninterrupted stress, and that combined with the fact that if you are a perfectionist and have no boundaries and are a high achiever and have high ambition, then typically, when you notice anxiety or stress, what we tend to do is, as my dad used to say, rub dirt on it and move on. And that's, and that works in the short term, but it doesn't work in the long term. It's very much like the Olympic athlete who realizes that recovery from training is as important as training. Otherwise, you're going to tear muscles and, do injuries. So, part of the science of burnout says that, the American illusion is that, well, you work for 50 weeks, you hold your breath for 50 weeks, and then you exhale for 2 weeks at the end of the year. And that's nice in theory, but that's not how the human mind and body work. What works is, in fact, taking mini vacations throughout the day, so that we go through a complete stress cycle. Whereas most of us are in kind of high alert most of the time. At work and at home. And by high alert, I mean sometimes actually hitting a PTSD level of hypervigilance. And so, especially when we hold ourselves to impossible standards, the problem with being perpetually in that cycle, of course, is the inevitable exhaustion that happens. We literally burn out our cortisol and adrenaline systems, all of our stress hormonal systems, to the point where if it gets bad enough, we can't recover. A lot of our clients will tell us that they wake up in the morning and it suddenly occurs to them, boy, I'm not sure I can get out of bed today. And if I don't get out of bed, the wheels are falling off fast. So anyway, the first thing is mini vacations throughout the day. And we have a technique that we prescribe for almost everybody we talk to called the R&R technique, that was actually created by a great writer named Michael Singer. You may know him from The Untethered Soul and other books.
Yeah.
But in The Untethered Soul, it's like a 2-sentence suggestion. But basically what it is, first and foremost, is to notice that you're stressed. And this is counterintuitive for most overachievers, because what we want to do is rub dirt on it and move on. Looking at the fact that we're stressed out feels like we're wasting time, and also it's sort of scary.
Or we're addicted to that stress. I mean,
exactly.
When I was working in corporate America, I mean, you don't want that stress level to go down, because then you're not
exactly. And that's the hypervigilance sort of parallel with post-traumatic stress disorder. The illusion is, or the fear is, that if I'm not stressed, if I'm not at high alert all the time, that I'm in danger, right? And that really is post-traumatic stress disorder. Anyway, so the R&R technique that Michael Singer prescribes is, and we'll send you a video about it. I mean, it's a 2-sentence suggestion in Michael's book, and we milked it for about a 5-minute video. But it really, really works. And we almost always prescribe this for folks, because it's not an end in itself, but in the beginning of my own recovery from burnout, it's all I had. Anyway, this is what you do. First of all, notice that you're stressed. And if you can do this mini vacation 5 times a day, it's incredibly helpful and effective. For me, it really turned things around in 5-10 days. But anyway, first of all, it's notice that you're stressed out. And by notice that you're stressed out, I mean, to actually notice that when you're stressed. But what we ask you to do, rather than go down some sort of a rabbit hole psychologically, what we ask you to do is just scan your body, and typically between your throat, or between your neck and your navel, as we like to say, you'll notice that there's some kind of physical manifestation. There's a tingling or a twinge or a pain, possibly. A lot of people feel it in their sternum, their shoulders. Particularly women notice it in their throats. Almost everybody notices it in their guts. Anyway, that's number 1, is notice it. Number 2 is to inhale through your nose. Number 3 is exhale through your mouth. And as you're exhaling, visualize a door opening wherever that stress is, and for that energy to pour out. Because the fact is that the stress cycle ought to be a 90-second sequence. I mean, even if we're in a near car wreck, for example, and we almost get broadsided, there's this huge surge in adrenaline and cortisol and all of the perceptual hormones. But 90 seconds later, it'll be half as much, and 90 seconds later, it'll be half as much again. So when we try to maintain, as you said, that edge and be that stressed out 24/7, or at least 10 hours a day at work, it literally burns out our stress. So the whole idea around the R&R technique and this mini vacation concept is this takes 5 or 10 seconds tops to do. But noticing that you're stressed is really, really important, because using the PTSD example, there are two sides to PTSD. There's hypervigilance, but there's also hyperavoidance. And hyperavoidance is what we do when we rub dirt on it, pretend it's not happening, and move on. And neither hypervigilance nor hyperavoidance will get us to peace. They'll just prolong it. So noticing it helps to address the hyper avoidance, and then letting it go addresses the hypervigilance. And anyway, very simple, very easy to use technique. We don't ask anybody to start by meditating, 20 minutes 3 times a day, although that'd be a great idea. But this mini vacation technique really, really works. It's not the complete answer, but what it does do for a lot of people is to help them realize, wow, there's another way I can live. I don't have to live at high alert all the time, because high alert all the time isn't going to work. It just, sooner or later, you'll wake up as I did one day. You'll be sitting in your bed and you'll think, I don't know. It's kind of like the movie Groundhog's Day, when Bill Murray's alarm clock went off for the millionth time. I'm not sure whether I can get up today. And to really be in fear that this may be the day I don't answer the bell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I totally believe that whole awareness idea. I think a lot of people go through life thinking that they're aware. I mean, I guess when I was younger, I always heard that thing of like living in the present. Like, well, of course I live in the present, but what other option do I have? But that's not the same as actually being aware of what is happening to you right now, your surroundings, feeling it all. And in this case, being aware that you actually are stressed, and
Yes.
and there needs to be some sort of response rather than just powering through it, or having another cup of coffee.
Right. But again, using the Olympic athlete metaphor, what athletes do is they train hard, but they also intentionally recover, and in lots of different forms. And but they put as much emphasis on recovery as they do on training. And that's what we're talking about here. The thing is that sometimes we're mistakenly thinking that if we take 2 weeks vacation, every 50 weeks, that'll do it. And it'd be great if it did, but that's not how the human body works. If we wait that long, what happens to most of us is we're super stressed getting ready to go on vacation. We're pretty stressed throughout the vacation. And then we come back to a mountain of work and we're super stressed again. And so unless we can get that recovery time, it'll inevitably lead to that exhaustion where one day you can't get out of bed.
So what happens to these people who are in that midlife crisis and questioning everything? They have little kids at home. Maybe they're now finding themselves, I mean, men's testosterone level goes down after babies. Many men experience a lot more caring and empathy. They don't see the same value at work. And maybe that's combined with burnout. Is there a way, or is there hope for them to reignite that passion for work and the pursuits outside of the home?
Well,
In
what
a
we
different
ask
way, or
people
what
to
is
do,
the secret there?
yeah, a big part of the burnout breakthrough process is, I mean, the first, there's basically 9 modules, and the first 3 have to do with learning how to recover physically, and to try to get your energy back. And that's number 1, because if you don't get your energy back, you're not going to be able to do anything else. The middle 3 modules are, instead of living your life against the standard of perfection and never saying no, which is what a lot of us do, we ask people to look at their own personal values. And by that, I don't mean your morals or your ethics or being a good person. I'm going to assume everybody listening to your show is a good person. I'm sure they are. It's not about that. It's about what makes life for you. And unfortunately, when we push our health and even our lives across the table in the service of perfection, or in the service of some kind of handed down value system, handed down reference about the private schools and about the place where we live and so forth, we're really serving a master who is not us. So a lot of the work that we do is about helping people get clear about what do they really value, and beginning, instead of allowing the fears of the future or regret about the past bully them every day and damn near killing us. Instead, to substitute a different GPS, guiding principle system, and that is your values, your own personal values. So we take folks through a values exercise so that they can get clear on what really matters at this stage of life, and make decisions based on that. And they may or may not want to continue doing what they're currently doing. It doesn't, quitting a job or going to a Zen monastery is not the answer for everybody. But what is important is that we go through this values audit process to make sure that people understand where they are in alignment and where they're not.
Yeah, I do similar work with my clients too. That values orientation is so important, and I think it's important also to make sure people understand this is not a couple hours of conversation, then you sell the house and you move to Alaska or something.
No.
It is more the fact that you are taking the time to do that type of analysis of what turns you on, what is superfluous, what really matters to you, what are your greatest odds at achieving some sort of loosely defined idea of happiness versus just continuing going on expecting a miracle to occur that will somehow take you out of that feeling of malaise that a lot of people feel in middle age.
We've also found that let's take the high performing executive or business owner, and a lot of us. I've launched 10 companies and sold 8 of them, and my thinking was, well, you have to sacrifice everything.
Yeah, that's what they tell you, right?
Against that standard, and one of the things that one of the trainings that we offer is basically how to say no, because most of us, the idea of saying no is antithetical. We never even consider it, and it served us well to a certain point. It's been a superpower. It's just that now it's turned to kryptonite. So what do we do with that? And a lot of people will just ask me, yeah, but how do you say no? I mean, technically or literally or practically. So we actually offer a training on how to say no. It's actually how to be assertive without being an ass, whatever. And but there are 30 different ways to say no. And the illusion is that if I say no, that means I'll be fired or my career will crater or whatever. And our experience is that you actually gain more respect and achieve more in terms of real outcomes, real impact, things that will move the needle in a measurable way that shareholders care about, investors care about, customers care about, business partners care about. That there is a whole lot of things we need to stop doing, that we need to shed. A lot of the clients we work with who are in their 40s are still think of themselves the same way that they did in their late 20s. And the fact is that they have outgrown a lot of the things that they used to do, things that worked then, but are now inappropriate. We teach a process called Genius Zone that's about, most people have 2 or 3 things that they do better than anybody else, and that'll move the needle farther and faster in their careers, let's say. But when I ask people to do a Genius Zone audit, when they look at their time, they find out, how many of 40 or 60 hours a week do you spend doing that Genius Zone activity?
Where you actually
it's like a half an hour or 0. And, we spend the rest of our life doing things we ought to be delegating to somebody to do better, faster, cheaper than we can. So a lot of it is we get so addicted to what succeeded for us when we were 29. And when you're 39, we have to sort of rediscover ourselves.
Yeah. I also lead a group for guys over 55 trying to find meaning. Do any of these lessons also have a value for older men who've stepped off the hamster wheel?
Absolutely.
Who are trying to fill in and find what really counts to them for the next 20 years post work?
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, we're about almost exactly the same age, and I'm actually a year older.
49.
Wow. Yeah, 49. Yeah, it's amazing. Boy, these drugs are really working. Um, uh, but and for me, that was a big part of it because I mean, I had been successful on paper, but when I looked at my life, I was thinking, what would my tombstone say? And when I was honest with myself, the only thing I could think of was, here lies Scott, who worked very hard and paid a lot of bills. And apart from that, I'm not sure what I could say for myself. So the values piece is really, really important. Another part that I'll just mention, and this comes out of, and not everybody, when you take the online burnout assessment, you'll really see this, but resentment is a big part of burnout and a big part of suffering, period,
Yeah.
of course.
Yep.
And so the last three modules of our process are about resentment and forgiveness, and particularly forgiveness. And that's one of the things I found with burnout people, but people who are suffering generally, but especially burnout people, is that there are these resentments that we kind of rub dirt on, and they fester and they grow. And as they say, it's like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die. And so a lot of it is that. And I found also, particularly for people who are in their 60s, let's say, or nearing retirement, that a lot of it is, number one, to really understand what your values are now, not what they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago, what matters to you now, and then also to clean up relationships.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Yeah, easier said than done, but a very valuable. I mean, last question. I'm curious because you are a therapist and you did practice therapy as well as being a coach. If you could talk
Right.
a little bit about the difference of those two. I mean, I've done both and do one professionally. And I guess I'm really the part of coaching that I find really intriguing is the do something about you. You've learned something about yourself. Now do something about it part. But there's
Right.
a role that therapy plays, and there's a role that coaching plays. Could you talk a little bit about your experience with the two modalities?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I got involved with or went to graduate school and became a therapist principally because of this PTSD technology treatment nonprofit we set up, and I wanted to be knowledgeable. And interestingly, for me, when I was going through my own burnout, I looked at the literature, I looked at my own education and training, and I talked to a lot of my colleagues about burnout, and I just wasn't finding solutions. There are things that addressed anxiety and depression and so
Mhm.
forth, and stress, but burnout is kind of its own animal. I think they're both very, very valuable. What we find, however, I mean, the folks that we get, it's sort of a triage situation. When we first start talking to people, they're hurting.
Yeah.
They've already tried everything that they've ever heard of or thought of, and have that same existential waking up in the morning and wondering if they could do it another day. So action, we have found, at least particularly in the beginning, is very important, and also
Mm.
a practical approach to action that people can actually do. And by the time we meet with people, their cynicism is very high. They're not very hopeful. There's a definite despair. And so we intentionally, action like coaching is really important. And the more concrete and pragmatic and executable it is, because people don't want, I mean, it's no point giving them things they can't do, but we also want people to experience incremental success from day one, because we've got to turn this around. We've got to go from despair to
Yeah.
maybe there is some hope. So I think there's something you said for both approaches. In the beginning of burnout recovery, though, little tiny, intentionally tiny actions is what we have found works best.
Well, that's very interesting because you quite often think of therapy as more of a looking back and analyzing, and coaching is looking forward and doing. Though I know that, I mean, a huge revolution, obviously, in therapy is the cognitive approach and those minor changes. But what I've found in my own experience is that the therapists that I've worked at have not been as skilled in creating the plan forward, or to give those, like you say, any kind of the little things that advance you, so you feel like you're making positive change.
And with burnout, people are in crisis.
They're in
I mean,
crisis. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
they may or may not have multiple sessions to go through. I mean, and so we want people to have something that is proven to work right this minute. That's the whole idea around these fast fix calls, is to get people something that helps. It's maybe an aspirin or a little bit stronger. It's not a complete answer, but
Yeah.
we need to turn the tide from hopelessness to, what, maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Scott, thanks a lot for spending some time on this. I think we've talked about a lot of real actionable things and a lot of digging in on what it all is. I'm still wrestling with my own bouts with burnout in my 40s and how I conquered them. But I conquered them by leaving entirely and readjusting my whole value system around my kids and supporting dads. Not everybody has that luxury, but everybody should have the luxury of taking a hard look at their life and finding out what it means to them, because we only have one of these, and trying to maximize.
That's right. I think it's the damned advertising business.
Oh, that's true. Both of us come from that. We taught all the consumers wrong way to think about it.
That's right. Thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you.
Okay. And people can find you at fastfixcall.com for the 15-minute burnout symptoms, but also you've got, I was on your website. I can't remember what the URL was on the.
Yeah, it's called Burnout Breakthrough. And we've just published a book called You're Not Toast, which will give you the complete start to finish system, burnout recovery.
Yeah, great. Okay, Paul Bass at GreatDad.com. You can find my coaching offerings at GreatDad.com/go. And I have a free course on gratitude, which is a great way to recharge your system, which you can use with I think the code for the free version of that is on that page. Okay, till next time, stay strong.